Thank you all so much for tuning into my show, William Wallace for America. I appreciate your time and I'm grateful that you're spending it with me. But what's even more important to that is I like to bring on guests that really not only contribute a lot to our community and our state, freedom in our country, but with some issues that I think will improve education, freedom, liberty, fiscal responsibility in our country. And with me today is not only a person who is doing that, but he represents an organization that I think you're going to want to not only keep your eyes on more of. He's been on my show before, but here is somebody that I think you're going to want to be involved with their organization, the Pelican Institute. Daniel Erspamer, thank you so much for being on there. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, William, my friend. It's great to be back with you. Appreciate it.
Well, I'm always impressed by the things that you're working on, but I'm always amazed by how few people know about the impact that Pelican Institute has on not only our community, but our state, but also on national politics and national issues. And while we're on that, I'm going to jump way ahead because you all had an issue during COVID that I think Sarah was the one who headed this that had a national impact. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. One of the things we do here at the Pelican Institute is we have a public interest legal center. We call it the Pelican Center for Justice. And so we represent clients free of charge to mostly sue the government. And in the case that you're referring to, we were honored to represent Brandon Trosclair, a local business leader in the Gonzales, Louisiana area. And Brandon's lawsuit challenging the employer vaccine mandate resulted in the first nationwide injunction against that Biden administration policy at the U.S. Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. So that had a big impact on saying stop to the Biden administration. You can't insert the government rather between an individual and his doctor, and certainly not an employer. And so that's one of a number of successes our legal team, led by Sarah Harbison here, has notched in the courts in the last few years.
We're gonna have her on the show tomorrow, and she's gonna talk about some of the legal things that she's working on right now for this year. And I'll probably recap a little bit with her also to keep people caught up. But what I'd like to talk about is what is the Pelican Institute working on in Louisiana now, and I always like to preface that by saying a lot of people that listen to my show nationwide, I tell them, hey, tune into things that are going on in Louisiana, because those things are oftentimes things that will be good in other states. And likewise, when I interview people in other states, because our country was originally set up under a states' right type of platform. Originally our founding fathers didn't want everything to be the responsibility of the federal government. They wanted to be responsible of the states. So when we show what other states are working on individually through that 10th Amendment, we're able to find out how we can improve things in our own state. And so let's talk about some of the, I want you to comment on that too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's, I think it's particularly timely and important as we celebrate America's 250th that one of our goals for the year is to help remind people, whether it's here in Louisiana or across the country, what were those founding principles on which the country was built. And this idea of federalism that the federal government should have some set of powers that are enumerated in the Constitution. And as you mentioned, the 10th Amendment delegates anything not explicitly granted to the federal government, to the states, or to the people. And gosh, if we ever needed a return to federalism and to begin to really hack away at the growth of the federal government, now is the time to do it. And it looks like we may have some opportunity for that. So I just couldn't agree more. And I think particularly as we celebrate the 250th, it's a good time to remember those core values on which our country was founded.
It's funny you bring up the word federalism. I'm gonna make an analogy to liberalism. A lot of people forget that liberalism actually used to be neoclassical liberalism, which is really true conservatism. Federalism, people today think of giving that means giving more power to the federal government. But back in the day, federalism actually meant more of limiting the government to just, government, national issues. And I find it funny how the meanings have changed just enough to be able to give different groups power. Do you kind of see that too?
I do, and it's an important one for really to get back to the basics. This is one thing I think the left in America has done a really exceptional job at. Unfortunately, is redefining words to mean different things. And it's of course not just the ideological left, but that does seem to be a big chunk of it. But look back, my teenagers had just finished reading Animal Farm in 1984, and it's a good reminder. It's exactly what was predicted in some of these
exactly right.
books.
Well, let's talk about some of the things that Pelican's working on for this year. I know there's a couple things that I want to lead into. One, you all do a lot of things, working on a lot of issues coming up in the legislative session in Louisiana, but then you're also working on the Pelican Summit, which I want to go into also. Sometimes you have things that are hand in hand that you're going to do, that you do at both the legislative session and the summit have some of the same topics, but then of course the legislative session focuses more on the policy part of it. And then of course the summit is more of an awareness thing. So, but I want you to talk about what you all are working on now. I know one of them is school choice, which is why I'm wearing a t-shirt today. I've got my "Don't Clip My Wings" shirt on for the Pelican Institute's t-shirt that y'all had.
Oh, that's great. And
go ahead.
if your listeners are interested too, sign up and we can hook you up with a t-shirt or a can koozie or anything you'd like on those "Don't Clip My Wings." We'd love to spread it around. So well done, sir.
Thank you. So let's talk about the things that y'all are working on now. I guess you start if you want to do I know your summit is before the session. If you want to talk about your main focus just in general.
Yeah, so let's start with the summit. It's coming up here in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, on March the 3rd, and it's going to be a great day. Always, William. I know you'll be there, or at least I hope you'll be there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And our theme this year, really goes back to what we were talking about a minute ago. Our theme this year is "We Hold These Truths." This is a time to come back to the core fundamental values that have made America great. And so we'll be really looking at the policy agenda here in Louisiana in the context of those core principles. And registration is now open, and we've actually even announced one of our keynote speakers will be the world-renowned biographer Walter Isaacson. Walter has just released a book called "The Greatest Sentence Ever Written," about the Declaration of Independence. So Walter will talk some about his experience writing that book and what he really has gotten to as the core values and why it's the greatest sentence ever written. But also, hopefully we'll get to talk to him a little bit about, of course, he wrote the biography on Elon Musk and Steve Jobs and several others. So it should be a really great conversation. That's actually going to be our closing event on March 3rd before we get to our after party.
I love it.
Yeah, so more announcements coming soon. We're working on a couple that should be a lot of fun. And of course, we'll also have our usual breakout sessions and policy discussions. And we're going to this year feature a series of kind of like TED Talks. We're calling them Pelitalks.
I love it.
And so we'll get a chance to see 3 or 4 of those throughout the day, sort of break up our panels and that sort of thing, but also give some inspiration and excitement as we go throughout the day.
Do you have any of the speakers, the other speakers lined up, or that you can announce, or will those speakers be listed on the website?
Yes, so that's the only one we have announced so far, but we will be having a few more to announce here in the next week or two. And yes, you can get those at pelicanpolicy.org. If you click on Get Involved, you can find the link to our Solution Summit there, and it'll have all the updates. And also, that's where you can register. And we're in I will mention an early bird pricing until the end of January. So instead of the $150 ticket, it's $99. And I should mention
Nice.
that that includes breakfast, lunch, an open bar, and some heavy hors d'oeuvres there at the end, as well as some great engagement and entertainment throughout the day.
Well, the hors d'oeuvres are always great. The food is always good, but I'm gonna tell you, and I'm of course I'm just saying this because I've been there to every one. The speakers are so phenomenal. I've learned so much because what I find that even though Pelican policy can be seen as somewhat of a freedom liberty, which might be in some people's view as being one-sided, you all seem to be very unbiased, in the speakers, and it's speakers from many different sides and many different opinions. And I think that's what makes your policies so good and well thought out, because you bring in so many different people from so many different angles to create policies that will represent a lot of freedoms for everyone. And I
Yeah,
really appreciate that. And so it's really a good blend.
well, I appreciate that, William. We really do try to bring a lot of different viewpoints, and look, I think one of those core values of America is the value of civil discourse, and so I've made a commitment. I'm happy I've accepted a whole bunch of different ones over the last few months, but to show up to discuss and really model, how we can talk about issues, even contentious ones, even ones on which we disagree, but do so, without being disagreeable, and to assume that we all want what's best for people and for the country, and we just have different ways to get there. And so, if we can engage in that dialogue, engage in the ideas, even of our ideological opposition, it's going to make our position stronger and more well thought out. And we come at this, of course, from a research and data perspective, aiming at how do we create the most opportunity for every person to flourish. And that's the lens through which we look at policies and arrive on recommendations and conclusions.
When you're cooking term, they always say the cream rises to the top.
Yeah.
So when you cook something the right way, cream rises to the top. So do you think that when you have the right amount of debate, the right amount blended with the right recipe, I guess you could say, of facts and the right people in the right mix, do good policies also rise to the top?
Absolutely. It's a great analogy. And, of course, we do a lot of cooking here in Louisiana. I like to cook myself. And so, yeah, you get the right ingredients in that gumbo and everyone's going to love it. That's really what we try to do. And if we can raise the level of civil discourse, it helps make the voters more tuned into the issues. It helps make individuals understand these decisions that are being made by our representatives, whether it's here in Baton Rouge or up in DC. Louisiana, of course, as you well know, plays an outsized influence in policymaking in Washington right now with Speaker Johnson and Leader Scalise. Bill Cassidy is a committee chair.
Mhm.
Senator Kennedy on the Judiciary Committee, and so we've got Julia Letlow, Congresswoman Letlow, on the Appropriations Committee. So Louisiana is well represented in Congress in terms of the ability to really influence outcomes. And so what we do here in Louisiana, and the more we can educate voters and the public and lawmakers, the better outcomes we're going to get for ourselves and for the country.
So I know you don't have all the speaker lineup. You can't announce the speaker lineup right now, but can you announce some things, some of the issues, or some of the policies that you're going to be covering at the summit? I know that if I'm past interviews that I've done, you always have bring on people to really kind of direct where your policy is going to go for not only Louisiana, but as a reflection of what national issues. Can you talk about some of those issues that you're going
Yeah.
to be talking about at the summit?
Yeah, absolutely. One thing, a couple of issues we cover, it seems like every year, because they continue to be really important. One is really looking at the fiscal agenda for the state. Of course, there's two sides to that coin. One objective, we've been very clear that we believe it's imperative that the state phases out its personal income tax. and make our tax code simpler, flatter, fairer, more predictable. The legislature and the governor made some significant progress toward that in the fall of 2024, and they should really be applauded and cheered for taking on some challenging issues, getting us to a flat tax on the personal and the corporate side, eliminating the corporate franchise tax. But we're also going to talk about what's next. We're not done yet. And by the way, the states around us are making progress too. Mississippi
Mhm.
has announced a dedicated phase out of its income tax. Arkansas is making progress toward that. Of course, Texas and Tennessee, both nearby, have no personal income tax.
Right.
So we'll be talking about what can be done, and of course, to get tax reform right also means to get the spending policies right.
Right.
We look at the trajectory of our state. While it's gotten a lot better the last couple of years, we've just grown and grown and grown, over 80% growth just in the last decade
Nice.
of state government. So this is an opportunity to say, okay, if we want to get our fiscal house in order, if we want to get to that elimination of the income tax, how do we constrain the growth of spending and really get government to a place where it can be sustainable over time?
What do you and the Pelican Institute see as the best way to achieve that?
Yeah, so what we've proposed is something called the government growth limit. What this does is it puts a cap on the growth of recurring spending. So those expenses, this isn't one-time roads and bridges kinds of things, but the ongoing budget for the state. So what it says is government should only grow at a rate of population and inflation. So if the state is growing with people coming into the state, of course, over the last decade, we've had substantial out migration, people leaving the state. But as the population grows, that also means there are more taxpayers to carry the
Right.
burden, and then it's fair to have government keep up with inflation, just like anybody else. So if we can if we can constrain the growth of recurring spending to inflation and population, we believe that creates a pathway to phase out the income tax probably over the next 8 years. It could go a little faster if there's further cuts, or a little slower if the economy has a significant slowdown. But basically, what you would do is cap that spending and use the surplus that's generated from it. So, revenue collected, taxes collected over the limit, and use that, half of it to invest in the backlog of infrastructure projects, and the other half to buy down the income tax rate for the next year. So you're smartly and thoughtfully phasing that down, so you're not making any big dramatic swings, and you're tying it to real numbers, real collections, and real constraint in spending. If we'd done this 10 years ago, we already would have eliminated the personal income tax. So now, it's the old saying about when's the best time to plant a tree. Of course, it was 20 years ago, but
Right.
today's better than tomorrow. So that's our opportunity on tax reform right now.
So be a policy basically that limits spending based on either the growth or the decline, so to speak, of it, which would kind of keep it in a kind of a funnel, and the spillover goes towards I'll say a rainy day fund, for lack of a better term,
Yep.
in that. And I think that's is something, of course, would be a little bit more restraining on government officials, because now the spending can go willy-nilly based on who's in office. And if there's more federal money or there's more dollars, and they're grabbing all these different funds and revenue sources from all over the place and spending based on that. And this policy kind of restricts it to a very narrow, I guess, very narrow lane, if you will. Is that
Yeah, it
right?
forces the important conversations of priorities. If we're going to make the very best use of taxpayer dollars, that should be hotly debated, and there should be a lot of transparency around it. And we should make sure we're only spending taxpayer dollars on those things that only government can do, and that are high priorities for the voters and the taxpayers who pay them. So this is a policy that not only helps get the income tax phased out, but as you said, forces that debate over priorities. So we have a higher level of confidence that we're getting the highest and best use of the money that we're shipping off to Baton Rouge in the form of taxes.
Just off my observation, and I've thought about this debate for a long time, where lower taxes and not having income taxes. And I've looked at other states, and other states that have less income, have little to no income tax. Of course, now the southern states are going to no income
Yep.
tax. I also notice those states have a higher cost of living. And Louisiana seems to have a really nice mixture of a low cost of living, good food, good culture, great places to see. We have taxes that are higher than everybody around us, but does lower taxes, if we get rid of income taxes, do you think that we'll see our cost of living go up because the government has to kind of make up that money somewhere, so they start taxing us higher on property taxes? Is there a right mixture? Do you all have your eyes on that right mixture, I guess, to kind of keep cost of living down, but yet have a tax-free environment?
Yeah, I mean, this is exactly why you've got to tie uh, the phase out of the income tax to the restraint in spending, because otherwise you could do away with the income tax tomorrow, but the conversation would be, of course, where do we tax somewhere else? So if you're in Texas, for example, they have runaway rates on local property taxes. And it's the state of Texas does not subsidize local government in Texas as much as we do here in Louisiana.
Right.
And so we are really in a position to thrive, to be able to keep those property taxes low, which our homestead exemption largely ensures will continue to stay that course, and we can have the sales tax is relatively high, but for a state with no income tax, it's in the ballpark. So if we have a sales tax somewhere around where we have it now, hopefully a little bit lower, continued low property taxes, and phase out the income tax, this is a recipe for absolute economic success. Especially, we will be much stronger compared to our neighboring states, who, in some cases, Texas, they're fighting to try to reduce property tax rates. And in Mississippi, the conversation is sort of trading off lower income tax for a higher sales tax, which we've lived through here in Louisiana too. But it's far better to get to that zero tax by constraining spending rather than just swapping it with a different tax somewhere else.
And people can handle a slightly higher sales tax, as if they're not paying, income tax, and they're only paying a little bit of sales tax on things that they choose to buy.
Right.
People can handle that. But I want to jump a little bit to the to big industry. Of course, now we talked about more of a consumer thing, but what does the Pelican Institute have in policy? That are they, or are you working with some of these big companies, these big industries that are coming into Louisiana? Of course, there's a little bit of argument right now that the AI data centers are getting some special treatment and not having to pay taxes. And of course, there's some elected officials that are taking some arrows, because
Yeah.
they have made deals with these guys to not have to pay income or not have to pay taxes. And Entergy now wants some tax relief. Is there anything that you are working on to balance that out? I mean, I understand, that somebody's got to pay the tax, but at the same time, somebody also, corporate welfare sometimes, or it's seen sometimes, or tax breaks are sometimes seen as corporate welfare. Where do you all stand on that, or where's your thought on that?
Yeah, it's a great point. And look, it's good. And from my perspective, it's really good news. The Meta data center and a few other data centers that have been announced. This is a huge opportunity for Louisiana, and it really puts in focus the need to get exactly what you're talking about, some of these issues right. The best scenario is a tax code where you don't need to bribe companies to come, right? That you
Right.
have, you talked about the low cost of living. These data centers use a lot of water. We've got plenty of that here in Louisiana, and they use a lot of energy. We have plenty of that here in Louisiana. So we're really well positioned to do this well. However, what it speaks to is the need to, one, make sure we have permitting reform, especially around industrial and energy products that
Right.
allow us to produce that energy more quickly and without as much red tape. It's important that we look at things like consumer regulated energy, so that you may have seen The president actually just announced something today focused on Microsoft. There's more of that coming. And Meta has announced plans to build small nuclear reactors in order to generate low cost electricity for their data centers. So the more innovation we can bring to this and escape that government monopoly of the current utility systems, the more innovation, the more market competition we bring to that space, the better off not only these companies are going to be, but the better off every taxpayer is going to be. And will mean we don't have to do quite as much in terms of the traditional kinds of economic development tools that have, in many cases, rightly drawn criticism.
Yeah.
Why is a tax cut for one industry better than everything? We believe everyone should play by the same rules. So, I think we'll start to see that even out. Of course, the thing to remember about that is it's an arms race. And so while it's very easy for me as a policy person to say those incentives are bad and they're not fair for taxpayers and it's not good tax policy, and all that's true. Uh, but we're also competing with states like Texas and Mississippi and Arkansas and others who spend a lot on those things. So it's always a
Right.
balance of pragmatism and principle in making policy. And I think we're headed. It may not be perfect, no doubt about it, but we're headed in the right direction. And we've got to just keep our foot on the gas and keep heading there. I'll also just briefly mention big issues that are going to be before voters and ultimately before local governments that have a big impact on these policies, is the constitutional amendment that voters will consider, and we could probably do a whole separate show on
Yeah.
just that. But I'll mention it briefly. Voters are going to take another shot at reviewing some fiscal changes in the Constitution, one of which will be a trade-off to get into some of these dedicated funds in order to pay off pension debt for local governments in order to give teachers a pay raise. And the other one will allow parishes to decide whether or not to levy the business inventory tax. This is a killer of a tax that
Yeah.
really needs to go, but many local governments claim they are overly reliant on it. So how do we again focus on restraint of the growth of government in order to eliminate those taxes like the business inventory tax, which just needs to go?
You said something key, when you said local governments that rely on some of these taxes. And the problem is that a lot of our local governments have relied so much on our taxes instead of trying to make cuts. And because they're not making the cuts that they should make, they're just, of course, everybody in government gets their car, everybody, gets their take home car,
Yeah.
the grass. I mean, like it just government just grows and grows and grows on our money. And the minute we go, wait a minute, we're trying to keep up with other states. We're trying to help, bring in, have an inward migration instead of an out migration of people. Government starts screaming, wait a minute, we need that money. I mean, do you think there's anything else that we could do to kind of say, that we might be able to work with government a little bit better and say, look, guys, let's find it. Find ways that you can cut your budget. Have you all thought about that?
Absolutely, and we're seeing that process play out for maybe not as great reasons, but however we got there in New Orleans and in East Baton Rouge Parish right now. The new mayor of New Orleans, Helena Moreno, will is inheriting a pretty significant budget deficit, and she's going to have to go through right away and trim, and has already done it. And it's going to be a big to do, no doubt, but it's going to expose just how much money we've spent on non-priority projects and programs in local government. East Baton Rouge is going through the same thing right now. The voters decided not to approve the mayor's plan to swap some dedications and move some things around, and so the council members and the mayor are going to have to deal with that, and are by making some significant cuts, including to the payroll. So these are things that probably needed to be done anyway, and some crises have forced the hand of elected officials. But I think what it's going to do at the end of the day is show people just how much
Yeah.
we're paying for local government, and I think taxpayers are done.
There's got to be a way, and to get even more invasive, I guess, on a policy perspective. You talked about some of the policies to basically control spending on a statewide level. Local governments, of course, is not. They kind of there's really not a way to be as policy directed, I guess,
Yeah.
to control their spending. That's more that gets down to more the grassroots of what people need to be involved with on their own communities. Is there maybe an outreach program that maybe Pelican might be able to encourage, maybe that to train people on a local level on how they can work to restrict their own local governments a little bit more when it comes to taxes? Is
Yeah,
there maybe some?
absolutely. And to make use of tools like Louisiana Checkbook and other places, Ascension Parish has put their checkbook online. Lafayette Parish School Board has put their checkbook online. So
$300,000 a year.
yeah, well, that's right. But transparency is important,
Right.
and so we need to also encourage more local governments. And look, AI has made this cheaper and better and faster to scrape this information and get it to the public. There are a number of private firms who offer these services at relatively low costs. So there's huge opportunity, I think, to continue to push government to be more transparent so that uh, voters and taxpayers and stakeholders have an opportunity to do more examination of those budgets and hopefully right size government from top to bottom.
You brought up AI just now. We talked about the data centers a minute ago, but do you see Pelican Institute getting involved in the future with anything to either limit AI or to incorporate more AI?
Yeah,
AI the data centers are going to become invasive, I guess. I'd rather these data centers be invasive on government than on
yeah.
people, but I'll let you talk about that for a second.
Yeah, absolutely. We have actually a Center for Technology and Innovation Policy here at the Pelican Institute. And here's my perspective on it. If we look over the last, let's say, 50 years, the outside of government, the sector of our economy that's grown the fastest and created more opportunity is that innovation sector, right? The advent certainly of the internet, of AI, of even things like cryptocurrency and other things. There is it has been the example of free enterprise that shows us when government is limited, the market can flourish. And of course, as predicted, the more and more that sector has grown, the more government has tried to get its grubby little hands all over it. So look, we believe in freedom and free enterprise. We also believe in personal responsibility. And so, and this is certainly a debate that continues to go on, even with among the conservative or conservatarian movement, about what the proper role of government is versus parents. Our belief is, for my kids, I don't want the government telling me what apps they can use or when they can use them. That's my job as a parent.
Right.
And our belief is the government has once again, overreached a little bit, and we're afraid that AI is similar. And this is a case where one state making bad policy affects everyone.
Right.
We've seen this companies when a bad tech policy is passed in California, it's not just limited to California. These companies have to, basically change their whole operations for everybody else. So, we actually supported, and we get back to where we started on federalism, but support the moratorium on state level AI regulations, because that's commerce. That is actually very clearly enumerated in the Constitution as a job of the federal government when we have interstate commerce. So, again, federalism isn't just limiting the powers of the federal government, though that's a big part of it, but it's also saying, wait, where is the appropriate role for the federal government versus states? And in this case, we believe it's the federal government. So a moratorium that says, hey, let's get a sense of where we're going here before we let California or New York or some of these hardcore lefty states, regulate the internet and AI in ways that really would stifle innovation and hurt consumers. People forget AI isn't just Chat GPT and Grok and all that, but it's predictive text on your cell phone. It's
Right.
all sorts of things that make our lives better. And so we have to really think about this holistically.
Yeah, when you're texting your friend, you say, "Hey, I'd like to tell you about what I did yesterday," and the predictive text sends, "Hey, go to XYZ store and go buy this product," and
Gotta love innovation, don't you?
but I know, right? So what I love hearing though from you when you talk about the other states, and this is why I repeat over and over again to my listeners when I bring on a state issue is that we need to pay attention. Like it's easy to pay attention only to national news and complain
Yeah,
about what our national elected officials are doing, but we forget how much more control we have with our locally elected officials and what's going on in our own state.
yeah,
But the reason why we have to pay attention to more what's happening in other states, like these data centers, you talked about them growing in Texas and Arkansas and California. If we don't watch what's going on in there, those states are creating policies that will either help or bind the hands or control the data centers there. And those data centers, when they come to Louisiana, are going to try to either bring those policies with them or shed those policies if they don't work for them. So we have to kind of know
yeah,
what's working and what's not working because those data centers might use it to their benefit, when
absolutely
they
right.
come here. But going back on a tax policy thing with the data centers, wouldn't it have been better instead of to give those guys a tax break and make them exempt from taxes, maybe make them pay something on, instead of giving them what tax exempt for 25 years, I think it is that the data center in Louisiana is getting.
Yeah, and candidly, I haven't reviewed all of those agreements yet. I know there's been a lot of discussion, particularly over the last week or so. My understanding is certainly it's not a blanket tax exemption. There are some targeted ones. Make no doubt, Meta is going to be paying taxes in Louisiana, and their workers are going to be paying taxes in Louisiana. Not to suggest there isn't
Right.
a really important conversation to have on business incentives and tax policy. There absolutely is, because you're right. Everyone should have skin in the game. That's how we get to the best answers. If and I'll give you an example. I know it's a controversial topic, but the homestead exemption is a great example of this. Part of the reason we have such a dysfunctional relationship between state and local government here in Louisiana historically has been the homestead exemption in many parishes for a long time, and even still today in a few. The only real substantive taxpayers were businesses because home values were largely less than $75,000, and
Right.
so a lot of people, just folks like you and me, particularly in rural parishes, may not owe any property tax. And so every time there was a new park or school or something else that needs to be built, and voters get to decide, on a property tax increase or on some other tax increase,
Village or whatever.
yeah, that's only business is paying it. Well, of course, as you and I know, businesses don't pay tax. Businesses pass on tax to their consumers and to their workers.
Mhm. Yeah.
And so, this is it. It led to, when you don't have skin in the game, you don't really care what somebody else has to pay in taxes.
Right.
That's why we believe tax policy, and one of the reasons that consumption tax, sales tax is a particularly good way to tax, to the extent you have to tax, because everyone has skin in the game. Everybody's in.
Right. Everybody has how shall we say, a reason to participate or not to participate.
That's right. Yep.
So, I know we're going to be wrapping up here in a few minutes, but I want to cover a couple more things. And you're going to be on my show. I'm going to have you on a lot more here before
Great.
the next session. But I want to talk about education for a minute. But then I want to talk about what you all have that you're going to be working on in the next session. I know that we've kind of dabbled on probably some
Yep.
things that are you going to cover there, but maybe more specifically. But let's talk about education. You
Yep.
know, I wore my T-shirt, don't clip my wings. It's kind of it's something I've always believed in that you're doing, you know, which is, you know, is in, you know, school choice. But let's talk about anything education that you're working on now that you, or that you're still working on. You're still in the
Yeah.
fight, I think.
Absolutely. You know, let's start with a fundamental belief. We believe every child in Louisiana, every child anywhere for that matter, but every child deserves the opportunity to attend a school or educational environment that fits them best. And, you know, I always start with this. I have 4 kids at home. And, you know, like any parent and grandparent during the COVID lockdowns, we really saw even more than, you know, than we have in the past,
Right.
just how different each of these kids learn. These are 4 kids who grew up with the same parents in the same household, you know, all the same
Yeah.
things, and they learn dramatically differently. You know, I had one during COVID who would get up first thing in the morning, plow through his homework, do it, you know, plow through his work, get it done, and spent the rest of the day outside playing basketball. Had another I had to basically drag across the floor in order to get her to do her schoolwork. And, you know, to this day, I'm convinced that you know, trying to get a kindergartner to do virtual education is why God gave us bourbon. So you know, so what we know is all these kids learn differently, and so that means one size doesn't fit all. And if we've made a commitment as a state, which I believe we have, that we're going to fund K through 12 education for our children, that has to be for everybody. And it means that, and you know, this is not about criticizing public schools or teachers or anything like that. Again, you know, sort of wrap your brain around this idea that even the very best school in the world might not be a fit for some kid,
Right.
right? This is just about finding that fit, whether it's a traditional public school, a charter school, a parochial school, a private school, a home school, or some mix of those things that works best. So the idea of what has become LA Gator, that the governor and many legislators have championed, says the dollars we're going to spend and budget for our kids are going to follow each child the school that fits them best, whether, you know, whatever that looks like. And parents are in charge. Parents know best what their kids need and how they're best going to learn. And so this is a significant initiative. If we're going to continue to commit to public education in Louisiana and in America, this is the only way we ensure that quality opportunity for every child. So it's big disruption. I get that. People
Right.
don't like new. You know, that's always a challenge. But so, you know, as it relates to the legislature, the legislature, of course, passed LA Gator 2 years ago. Unfortunately, in the past legislative session, didn't fund expansion of the program. They only funded the kids who had basically only funded the kids who'd previously been in the scholarship program with a few extras. But meanwhile, you know, 40,000 kids were on a waiting list, waiting to get into these. And let's be clear, this wasn't just, you know, I signed up, put my name on a list. These are parents who had to go in to a portal on a particular day, put in a lot of personal information, a lot of financial information.
Yeah.
These were not easy forms to fill out. So the fact that we had nearly 40,000 families do that is a signal to say there are people who want this, who need this,
They're
who are
committed.
raising their hand. So the challenge now is we've got to fund it. We cannot continue to leave these parents and kids in a lurch when we have made a promise that they will have a better opportunity. So this will be a big fight again. It was last year, and we hope to be able to provide good policy recommendations, some reforms that will lead us a pathway that hopefully makes this easier. And you know, we're in those conversations right now. But it really, you know, for your listeners out there who care about this, now is the time to talk to your lawmaker if you care, and to let them know this is important to you, because they're beginning to make their plans for the legislative session now. And this is something they're hearing from that deeply entrenched status quo a lot. They're hearing from the Superintendents Association, the School Boards Association, the teachers unions. The only counter to that is we the people, you and me and other people who care about this. So now's the time to make your voice heard.
What will interest me is how many of the elected officials that did that voted to not fund LA Gator are going to be the ones that when they realize how important education is, will run on the fact that I voted, for LA Gator, but they won't, you won't hear them say they didn't vote to fund it. You'll hear them say they
Yeah.
voted for it, but not to fund it.
And look, this is popular. 60+% of voters support this program. Even more actually support funding it now that it's been created. So not only is this the right thing to do, it's politically popular too. You just have to get out of that special interest bubble and actually talk to voters in your communities.
I like the special interest. Two more quick questions. One, how does homeschool fit into that option?
Yeah, so homeschool families actually have a couple of options here. We've long had a home study option for families. And if you're in that program now and want to keep things the way they are, you don't have to change a thing. For families who may want access to the Gator funding to complete their home study program or to help support it, they do have to abide by the same rules as everyone else, which includes reporting on expenditures and a series of end-of-year tests. Now, there's a lot of flexibility on what assessments you can use. They just have to be nationally normed reference tests, but they do, if by accepting funding, by accepting dollars from Gator, you do have to report outcomes. If you don't want to do that, you don't have to take the money, and you can continue to homeschool just the way you always have.
All right. In a quick legislative update, what are the top things that you're working on the legislature? In the legislative session coming up.
We really have covered a lot of them. So government growth limit to set up the phase out of the income tax, funding LA Gator. We're going to be working again on an issue to protect free association rights of government workers through some government union reforms that came very close to passing last session. And we'll continue beating the drum of occupational licensure reform and eliminating boards and commissions and red tape that's getting in the way of people going to work.
I love it. And the walkout question for you is and I want you to be optimistic, but I want you to be realistic too. Is freedom on the rise in Louisiana, or are we still having to hang on to it for dear life?
I do think freedom is on the rise in Louisiana. We've seen significant movement in the right direction. Our challenge is two things. One, to not let populism take over the pursuit of freedom. We're a deeply populist state historically. And so part of the opportunity of America's 250 is the opportunity to remind people of those core freedom and liberty principles on which the country was founded, and move sort of people who might otherwise be inclined toward a populist stake back to a focus on freedom and free enterprise. And the second thing is a reminder that all the states around us are making progress too. So from a policy perspective, we've got to not sit on our laurels and admire the good things. And there's lots of good things to admire that have been done, but really continue to keep our foot on the gas so that freedom can continue to be on the rise, and we don't just hope for the best.
Awesome. Daniel, I can't thank you enough for your time on the show today. I really appreciate it. And if you can hang on there for 1 second, I want to thank everybody else for not only spending the time with us, but as you heard, there's a lot of great things that the Pelican Institute is working on. But most importantly, we have to kind of work together on this stuff. And if we find organizations like the Pelican Institute, work with them on good, sound policies, we can not only make our community, our state a lot better and more a better place to live and a lot more fiscally responsible place to live. We can set examples for what our other states need to do and what our country needs to do. So thank you so much for your time. Daniel, thank you again. I appreciate it. And I ask everybody to please share the show, share it with somebody else that might have interest in what Louisiana is doing. And thank you very much. Have a great day.